Stuck inside my mind in this quarantine house. The light at the end of the tunnel isn't inside. Where do I go to find someone to talk to about all of my flaws? You can never be validated. Tell me the lies. I searched until nothing found us there and missed our mind. Instead I'm anxious and depressed and my coping skills are not fine. We were to fit and it felt like a waste of time. I heard an interview and I felt an instant connection. I learned CAT, BBD and my fun skills and each and every session. I'm pulling through, ready to ask the next question. The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider making a donation to the podcast via Venmo to the username @NQCATX. Hello, and welcome to NextQuest podcast, where I ask your potential therapist questions so you don't have to. I am your host, Noah S. Garcia, licensed professional counselor supervisor. Today, I welcome to the show Sara Sloan, licensed marriage and family therapist associate, supervised by Claudia Thompson, licensed marriage and family therapist supervisor, and AASECT certified sex therapist, who will be talking about her work in an area of specialty, sex therapy with couples. Welcome to the show, Sara.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So tell us, what are your credentials and experience?
Oh gosh. All right. Well, so I did my MAC at St. Edward's in Austin. I have worked at Enhancing Intimacy. I've worked at Respark, and I also have my own practice, Austin Concierge Therapy.
Very cool. So at Austin Concierge Therapy, do you accept insurance? If so, which ones? If not, why not?
So I don't accept insurance at this time. Reason being, actually, it's kind of a funny story. I used to take my kids to a therapist, and I remember our insurance retroactively denying months worth of bills.
Yep.
And I just thought, oh my gosh, it was horrible. It disrupted the relationship with the therapist and the kids. And it, left both of us kind of, well, okay, who's going to hold this giant bill now?
Right.
And so that's the reason. But I do accept health savings cards, and I am happy to, provide the paperwork to file so people can file on their own.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about regarding the retroactive denying and then the therapist. I know me as the therapist, I feel awful about then going to the client and being like, hey, you kind of owe $600. And
Exactly.
It's not cool. And then also, you have plans reset at certain points during the year, depending on the plan, right? At which time somebody may owe the deductible, but you're not notified that they meet their deductible. Instead, then you have to go and balance your books and then issue refunds. And it's just a lot to keep track of, especially when you have a lot of clients. So totally hear you.
Thanks.
So at your practice, do you have a reduced fee or a sliding scale available to clients?
I do. I would say probably almost a third to half are sliding at some level. I slide as low as 75 depending on the circumstance. And I work on an honor system. I definitely, if there's a divorce or, if someone's lost their job, I also will continue to see clients in those situations for free. And I just trust them to let me know when the situation changes. And that way I can give that slot to somebody else.
That's awesome. That's exactly how I operate too. So do you have weekend or evening appointments available?
So I usually do evenings up till 7, and I occasionally will do weekends. I tend to save my weekend slots either for bigger, poly groups, just because it's hard for 3 or 4 people sometimes
Right.
to find time during the week. Or if I just get overbooked and I need to get in some maybe like family histories, relationship histories. Sometimes I'll do those on the weekend as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, so is being a therapist your first career? If not, what was?
Gosh, so I was actually no, it was not my first career. But it's really funny because I was debating between the two. So my first career, I was actually an English professor or a writing professor. I taught writing at Texas Tech, at Marymount Manhattan University in New York City, and then at Columbia University in New York. And so I did a lot of work. It crossed actually with women's and gender studies. And so a lot of the courses I taught, for instance, like at Columbia in the university writing program, would have maybe a women's gender studies slant or, a focus on identity theory. Because it would cross sort of philosophy with writing, with literature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And character development too. Like,
exactly.
I see how that all intertwines.
Yeah. It all kind of fit together. And then I was a professional writer for a little while as well.
Awesome. What drew you to being a therapist?
A lot of things, I guess. I think maybe the catalyst was some of the work I did in the Me Too movement. I wrote a piece kind of at the very beginning, and I just got such a huge response. I thought, wow, I wish I could do more to help. And so that was a big piece of it. Also I had moved from teaching to being a writer, and I missed the interaction with individuals, with my students, and so I wanted to get back to something where there was just more interaction. It wasn't just me writing on my own, in my room or at a coffee house.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
How has it been? So are you seeing clients in person now, or are you working from home?
No, so right now I'm still working from home. I have some autoimmune conditions, and so with everything right now, I haven't gone back. My plan was actually to go back in August, and it just with the new Delta variety didn't happen. So right now everything is online, but I do in fact have an office. Someday I'll get back to it, I guess.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What are your hobbies, interests, TV shows you're watching, music you listen to, pets, kids, etc.
Yeah, so I'm really more of a homebody. I love actually cooking from scratch. I kind of got into that. My son's got something called FPIES. It's a rare disease, but it really limits what he's able to eat. So like you can't have dairy or soy, which, poison everything. So
yeah.
I started to play around with recipes. And so, funny enough, the weekends I have off, I kind of spend my time cooking just for fun. And, that said, I've got 3 kids, two of my own, one a stepson. And I do a lot with them. We're a big karate family, so a lot of martial arts. And then I've got a fat little dog named Naya. We got her at Pets Alive, and sometimes you can hear, especially nowadays, that she's with me some. She likes to snore, and she kind of talks. She's an old lady, so she makes a lot of little growly sounds. So occasionally you might hear her in the background.
That's so funny. Yeah, y'all, our listeners may hear my dog too. Her name's Batty. She is, as far as I can tell, a Chihuahua German Shepherd mix. She is the sweetest thing in the world. So cute, but also can be so very noisy sometimes. Luckily, right now she's laying in her bed. But I'll show you a picture of her later because I know you're going to have a mental image now and you're going to want to know.
Oh, I'm very curious now. Chihuahua and German Shepherd. That sounds absolutely amazing.
When you see her, it'll make sense.
I can't wait. Good.
Okay. So like you said, you're a homebody. What do you really like? What do you do the most that you enjoy at home?
We sometimes play board games, honestly. Clue. My kids, we got the Disney version. We are Disney fans over here.
Cool.
So a lot of board games, a lot of just kind of nature walks around the neighborhood. We've got some nature trails out by our house. So, that's kind of how we've been getting out. We love the lakes. I guess we have a boat. We take that out sometimes too. And
nice.
That's a nice way to get out with the kids without, risking too much exposure. So that as well, something we do a lot.
Very cool. Do y'all go out on Lake Travis?
Yeah, we do that. Sometimes we'll go over, some of the little restaurants, pick up food, and the kids are a lot more adventurous than I am. They like the water skiing and wakeboarding, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, cool. Wakeboarding, and they're amazing. I wish I was their age and I would be all over it.
No kidding. Yeah, there's so many things that I wanted to do when I was younger that I feel like the ship has sailed on because your body just starts feeling different when you get older,
Oh, I know. I think it would tell me no, thank you.
Right. Okay, well, let's talk about therapy you do for a second. What modalities do you draw upon in session with your clients?
So it kind of depends who I'm working with. I think, I am an Imago therapist. So, that kind of pulls on, attachment theory, communication, empathy. I can't help it, my background in women's and gender studies, I bring in a lot of feminist theory, working on, power and control. And I think those work really well, especially when you're working with relationships. So I do a lot of couples work and I feel attachment and then power and control. I mean, that's a whole lot of it.
Oh yeah.
Right there. So yeah, I think those are probably the two main ones that I kind of pull in.
Okay. So besides the obvious, what makes sex therapy with couples different from just couples therapy, and how might your approach differ in the two?
So if I have couples coming in just for, issues around communication, I do a lot of Imago, and then I will weave in sometimes elements from Gottman. Like I love using the Four Horsemen just to kind of illustrate and put a name to some of what's going on. I like the 15-minute check-ins. I occasionally pull in Gottman if we're doing some affair recovery. But as far as the modality, more attachment work in Imago. Now, if they're coming in for, more sex work, sex therapy, I feel like that comes in, draws in more almost cognitive behavioral work. Sometimes it can be more solution focused therapy. And if I feel like a lot of times couples will want some sex therapy as well.
Right.
Or it may even be what gets them in the door. And then you find out really it's more about communication and connection.
Right.
But I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that totally did. And now I'm curious because you said it, I'm not familiar with this term, and I just looked it up, and I would love if you could actually tell us a little bit about the Four Horsemen, what those are.
Yeah, so basically, the Four Horsemen, the criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and oh my gosh, you're going to catch me on the last one. I always forget one out of the four.
Defensiveness.
Defensiveness, yay. And so what I'll do is I'll go through those four and kind of give them examples, and I'll ask them to think, and I'll say, okay, we all use these sometimes. in looking at those four, which ones do you see yourself using the most? And so you can start to identify it, and then notice, a lot of times after we do that, I'll say, notice over the next week, when you catch yourself starting to do one of these, which is it? And, oh, okay, what could we do instead? Instead of this, is there a better way? Do we need to take a break? A lot of times I'll kind of utilize that piece also from Gottman, the idea that, the time it takes you to make a cup of tea, drink it, and come back. And I kind of will sub, okay, why don't you go, play a video game, maybe something, read a couple articles, off Apple News, whatever you've got in your news feed, or, just scroll on Facebook, and set a timer, and, come back once you're no longer activated, once you're not, wanting to stonewall or criticize, or you notice yourself getting defensive, let's take a time out if that's occurring.
Okay, cool. And I can see where you can weave in Imago within that in terms of like empathy building.
Yes. And so basically I use sort of Gottman to kind of structure things, but then once we get to the conversation, I really want them to default to Imago. And one of the main techniques, and it's so simple in Imago, and it goes with consent. It's asking, is now a good time to have this conversation? Because, I think for a lot of couples, we just assume that our partner's there for us, just like we do when we're little kids with a parent, and we just jump right in. And it might not be a time that they're ready to have that conversation, or maybe they've, just had a really bad day, or something's happened at work. And, by asking them if now is a good time, it gives them a chance to say no. And what I always tell couples, if they're going to say no, then I want you to set a time either later in the day, or, maybe tomorrow, when you can have this conversation. We're not going to just erase it. It's going to happen at some point, but we want to make sure that everybody's ready for it to happen.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So what are the 3 most common issues related to sex that couples like approach you with? What do people specifically seek you out with, like, for regarding the most in that context?
I think I do a whole lot of work with polyamory. And so I feel like probably the thing I see the most, at least over the last year, has been couples wanting to either open their relationships up and, learning how to do that in a safe way, or maybe they have just opened up their relationships and they're starting to kind of hit some, speed bumps around, how do we schedule jealousy? Maybe they've read some books, or they've, listened to, podcasts. So they have some terminology and they're like, well, that doesn't really fit me. And that doesn't really fit me. And so, we really work on meeting them where they are and creating what they want out of it. I had one, not long ago where, they wanted to open up the relationship, but they only knew the term polyamory. And they're like, well, that's not exactly it, and so we discussed other terms and
the language. Yeah,
exactly. And so then we were able to identify really kind of in 2 sessions, like, oh, okay, you're looking for more of an open relationship, maybe something that would be more akin to swinging. And that's very different than polyamory. And so I can see why that would have been really confusing if everything you're reading about open relationships is getting kind of grouped into this one area, which really doesn't fit you. I can see why there would be, some confusion around what, and I think this is key. It's always what they should be doing. And I always say, well, let's get rid of the should and figure out what you want.
Right. And just for our listeners, I know you and I both know these differences, but what are the differences between polyamory and, say, swinging or an open relationship?
So, it's different for everybody. So I hesitate.
Consent, right?
Yeah, exactly. I always hesitate to even label these terms, but the way I tend to conceptualize it is polyamory is often more focused on the relationship, and sex and sexual intimacy, all of that may come along with that. But what makes it different from just being open is that, it really is more built along the lines of maybe dating or friendship or companionship or, friends with benefits, but it's consistent. And it's that consistency and that relationship outside of just sexual contact, I think that I would say probably distinguishes it from just being open or swinging,
A good explanation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that's helpful. Whereas, in open relationships, it could be, you meet somebody, at a bar, online. It could, be an individual, just hooking up. It could be swinging. It could be hot wifing. It could look a whole lot of different ways. But I think the difference is you're not getting that kind of mental and emotional connection, at least not on a consistent basis, as opposed to polyamory.
Yes, I think that was a very good explanation. Thank you very much for doing that. So it sounds like people wanting to open up their relationship, explore polyamory, or just figuring out how to do it the right way that makes it work, what other sorts of issues are common that you work with regarding sex therapy with couples?
So I would say the other two big ones are either desire discrepancy. I see that come up, especially in couples that have maybe been married for a while, where sex is sort of slowed down or perhaps dropped off. And usually one partner is wanting a lot more than the other. I also do a lot of work around sexual dysfunction. And that could look like ED or vaginismus, or I do a lot of work also for survivors of breast cancer. And so, if you've had any sort of medical issues, such as chemo, radiation, even surgeries, right, which have caused the body to kind of change, how do we get back to having a normal, healthy sexual relationship when things are completely different?
Got it. Okay. So one big issue I often see monogamous couples struggle with is reconnecting after an affair. So I have a couple of questions here for you. The first one is, how do you go about working through this with a couple? And the second one is, what are some common reasons you hear for having an affair or two or three?
Oh gosh, that goes all over the place. I tend to meet the couple where they are. And so, if they're in a traditional monogamous marriage and, they can't see anything existing outside of that, then I will tend to default to Gottman, the atone, attune, attach. And I do a whole lot of psychoeducation, usually during the first couple sessions, just to let them know what they're going to be going through and that this is not an easy and quick process, and that it's going to take a lot of work and that some of this will involve grief work and that, each day may be terrible and then it'll get a little easier and then a little easier. And, over time, we can build back that trust. But I also, I think it's Esther Perel that says, okay, well, the marriage you had up until now is gone. So we're going to start over. And, the cool thing about that, what I try to emphasize is, well, now we can make it whatever you want it to be. And what I mean by that is, whatever the issues were that led to, the infidelity, hey, we can shore those up now. We can talk about them. They're out in the open. So awesome. We can go from here if people are willing and able to do that.
Okay. And what about some common reasons for having affairs?
Maybe
not reasons, but maybe more like reasoning.
Reasoning.
Like, what is the reasoning behind it?
So, I've had a big influx lately, and so this is just the first one that comes to my mind, is it seems to occur a lot at the end of a pregnancy or during kind of that first year of babyhood. And I think that really is just the focus has shifted. There may be some, physical injuries that aren't allowing for, couples to kind of re-engage, at least in the way that they are familiar with. And so, unfortunately, I see a lot happen around that. I think other affairs I've seen, at work, that sometimes I think, you hear of people having a work wife or a work husband. Unfortunately, sometimes that can turn into, maybe something more than it should have been originally. And I don't know that it was even intentioned that way a lot of times.
And I'm sure like stress plays into that, it would seem like.
Totally. I think it's stress. I feel like it's either happy hour after work, maybe, they drink a little too much and things happened, or a work party. I've heard of that a couple times.
Always with the work parties.
Yeah. Because I suspect it's been under the surface for a while, and it just, that gives it an opportunity to kind of pop out. Yeah. And I guess, maybe another way to think of it is if you're familiar with Stan Tatkin, his concept of having thirds, or even triangulation, right? And so I always see whenever there's a third that kind of gets wedged into the relationship, now that could be the baby, that could be work, that could be alcohol or drugs, but anytime there's kind of that wedge put between a couple, it sort of creates that opening for more to occur.
Got it. Okay. Now, speaking of monogamy, in my experience, monogamy just isn't a good fit for everyone and for a variety of reasons, right? In your experience, what are some reasons that individuals and couples choose polyamory instead?
So I think, again, it kind of runs the spectrum, but just to kind of think of what I've seen a lot of, one, there are those that just crave variety. Variety in their sex life, and maybe, they might have a partner that loves it as well, and awesome, then we can open up and, have new experiences. Unfortunately, sometimes it's more lopsided, sometimes it's more one than the other. I've also seen a lot who maybe identify as bi or pansexual and aren't able to get all of their needs met with just one person, or also those who aren't interested always in the same kind of sex. You'll see maybe a discrepancy, for instance, around kink or
Right.
a particular fetish. And, so you'll have maybe, almost like a closed relationship sexually, but then one of the partners will want to explore kink and,
Right.
Their sexuality in that way. Also I've seen those who are neurodiverse, maybe those who are on the spectrum who aren't as interested in, sexual physical contact, but they love the romantic aspects and the mental and emotional intimacy. They may have an open relationship where the partner is able to, seek sex elsewhere, or maybe they'll be part of a polycular or, poly group, and then also, for asexuality. And, the last thing I see is when, there's a partner maybe for, a physical reason, maybe post-menopause, maybe after surgery, and they no longer want sex, or at least not in the way that their partner wants it. And so they open up to allow them to experience it elsewhere.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. So some fun words that I'd like to introduce to the audience are the words polycule and throuple. I don't know why they are just such fun words to say, even for some reason. Can you define those terms for us?
Definitely. So I usually will when I have a poly group, I'll start with poly group, and then I'll ask, what would you like me to call you? Do you have a word you like to use? And sometimes they'll use throuple or polycule interchangeably. So I don't want to, stifle anybody's, own definition. Sure. But in my mind, usually when I use the word throuple, it might be for a group of three. And a polycule, I would usually say a group of four or more. And that's kind of, at least in my mind, but I know they can certainly be used interchangeably by others, but that's just in my mind how it goes. Yeah,
totally. That's exactly how I think of it in my head as well. And so we know COVID has been awful for everyone, but it feels like there would be specific ways in which polyamorous individuals are impacted. How have you seen people impacted, and how are people navigating this space with COVID?
So I think it's been really, really tough. You know, because a lot of the outlets that used to be available have really been taken away. You know, just for instance, and I think they came back briefly, I think over the summer, you know, some of the play parties like Colette and Shine. I honestly, I'm not sure exactly what's happening at the moment, but I know that they were shut down for a while, you know, as well as, you know, some of the munches. I know there used to be one that was at Whole Foods during lunch and, you know, and meetups, and all of those closed down. And I haven't really seen them fully come back yet. So that's been really tough, you know, and I was just having this conversation with a group the other day. So I think that used to be one of the ways a lot of them would meet. And I think that it's been sort of closed down, and now their main outlet has really been dating sites. And I don't know that it's, you know, it's an option, right? At least it's an option. You know, something as like OkCupid, where you can actually put that designation, you know, of course, FetLife. But it's not the same as it was, for sure. And, you know, the other thing I've seen be a big point of conflict is for those that are more maybe on the open end, you know, more like swinging or, you know, kind of more casual sex.
Right.
That has been very problematic because of COVID, right? You know, the risk of exposure, you know, and the fact that, you know, COVID does stay in the testes much longer, you know, and well, I would hope that people are, you know, using safe sex.
Right.
Anyway, but, you know, all of that kind of rolled in, you know, has really created some conflict where you'll have one couple that's maybe more comfortable, you know, venturing out, and, you know, if they have a primary partner or, you know, maybe a spouse who's, you know, wanting to stay closed down, you know, for fear of COVID. So it's created actually quite a bit of conflict, I would say.
It has created quite a bit of conflict. I agree with that. And I also think that it has even strengthened the necessity of boundaries and communication, as if, like, to me, that's the biggest skill somebody needs in order to be successful with open relationships or poly, etc. But I think it's especially important now in thinking about the idea of consent as well. And so what I've seen a lot of people do is just stick to their polycule, you know, or form a polycule and just only see people within that. And I think a lot of people have been pretty like pleased with those results, but there's definitely a lot of people out there who are just so unfulfilled. I mean, and I think that speaks a majority of the population right now with the pandemic, just in different ways.
Yes, no, I agree completely.
So, you know, we talked about Imago earlier, and I know you're trained in Imago in addition to sex therapy. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you employ your training in these areas with polycules and thruples, for example?
Yeah, of course. I think Imago, you know, when I was looking to do an additional couples training, I really wanted to find one that I could use for my thruples and polycules. And, you know, and kind of doing the analysis, I really think Imago is the best bet, because it provides, you know, one, a safe space for negotiating the terms. You know, the focus is on connection and communication and, you know, empathy. So you can also, you know, focus on sexual empathy. You know, it provides everyone a voice. And, you know, I went ahead, and that is actually, it's funny, I did the Imago therapist training first, and then I also did the Imago facilitators training, which is very specific, a specific training that allows, you know, additional learning on how to work with groups, how to use Imago with groups. And so I don't know that this is really a traditional way of applying it, but it's how I applied it. And I think it works really well. It gives, again, everyone a chance to really talk, when you're trying to understand, okay, what boundaries are we going to set? It allows everybody a voice, especially because there's usually somebody that is maybe more quiet and might get, kind of tuned out. And so that's really what I love about it.
Cool. Earlier we talked about the idea of empathy and imago, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what sexual empathy is?
Yeah, so the way I would define it is sexual empathy is really the ability to remain open and curious. I think that if you can respond with sexual empathy to your partner or partners, it allows the sexual energy to really flow into the relationship instead of out of it. And I think it really creates, the possibility that sexual interests, desires, fantasies, may be able to become a reality, because it allows for that acceptance, lack of judgment, really, to reduce shame in all the areas that it can, easily come up in around sex.
Can you give us an example of like a back and forth between a couple in which sexual empathy is not reflected, and an example in which, in like compared to that, like what would having sexual empathy look like? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, completely. I always use a very stereotypical example of, maybe the heterosexual couple that comes in and, instead of using the imago dialogue, maybe they're just free forming. And, the husband will say, I really wish, maybe one day, you could, wear something, sexy, right? And immediately it triggers the wife. It's probably something that they've argued over a million times over, and of course it's maybe not coming out in the right way either, but, beyond that, and so she'll say, well, what are you talking about? I work a long day. How can you ask me to have to do this? Right. So there's no interest or curiosity, and so it can go sideways really quick. Whereas if you add imago to it, right, the structure of that, what would happen is the husband would be talking and the wife's job would really only be to receive it and to listen and then just to mirror back what she hears. So, that the way that might go with imago is he'd say, I really wish maybe you could dress up, or and the wife would mirror it back and say, okay, I hear you. You really would like me to dress up. Can you tell me more? Right. And there, right in that, can you tell me more? You might get to, something that really holds some meaning for the two of them. So then the husband might be able to say, well, gosh, yeah, I remember, when we were first dating, I just loved it so much. I got so excited and you were so beautiful. And now we're talking about something completely different.
Right.
Right. Now, the wife could say, oh, okay, yeah, I do remember that. That was really fun, and so it doesn't immediately devolve into an argument. It allows it to go a little further. And I think sometimes if you can pause and allow it to go a little further, all of a sudden, you're having a real conversation about something that matters, as opposed to a surface argument, around frustrations.
Right. Got it. Good example. Can you give us an example of maybe 2 to 3 imago-based strategies that can assist in creating greater sexual empathy?
Yeah, I think the simple act of mirroring, right? So when your partner's talking, a lot of times, I'll ask them to enroll, and so they know that, okay, we're going to dialogue. And I use dialogue as opposed to conversation, just so they know, okay, I just need to listen right now. And, when you're discussing anything vulnerable around sex, such as a fantasy, or even something as simple as just how you want to be touched, allowing your partner just to mirror back what they heard. Say, okay, I heard you want me to touch you a little softer. There's nothing that can be misconstrued. There's no shame involved. It's just listening. So I think, especially when, you're sort of reacquainting yourself sexually, maybe after, something like breast cancer or an affair, mirroring back what you need is one of the best techniques you can use. I also, I know I mentioned this earlier, but I can't say it enough, just asking permission. Is now a good time to have this conversation? I think that saves so much trouble, and just getting that, okay, pause, think, yes, now's a good time. And I would say those are probably the two techniques I think that work for nearly everything, whether it's couples communication or communication around sex, anything that has that potential for being, shame filled or, maybe a hot button topic.
Got it. Okay, great. That was really helpful. Thank you. Now, the next couple of questions, I know we could do a whole podcast on this, but just kind of giving us the basics, and I know that's asking a lot for you to whittle that down there. But can you speak to the physical and psychological impacts and effects of breast cancer on sex and intimacy?
Yeah, so, the physical effects can occur in a lot of different ways. One is the, either partial mastectomy, full mastectomy, if your breasts were used, if they were big in arousal or in sex and they're taken away, that can be really pretty traumatic. Then in addition to that, if you have, chemo, it can cause the cells to sort of die off and, can cause, dryness, tearing. So you want to make sure you get, the two different types of lubes. I usually recommend one more water-based that can be moisturizing, another maybe more silicone-based that might be, for more sexual penetration. Same thing with radiation. Radiation can cause scarring. And, that scarring, you might need to use a dilator or, maybe depending on the type of trauma, maybe a vibration or not a vibration. It really depends on what's happened. And then of course, estrogen blockers, right? That's a pretty common treatment for people with breast cancer, is that hormone therapy, which can immediately throw you into a pretty harsh menopause, which affects, again, lubrication, potential wasting, and all of that feeds into the psychological. The psychological moving through, sadness, anger, grief, despair, shame, kind of everything at once sometimes. And, another thing I see a lot is oftentimes those that are going through it may have been a caretaker and learning to allow others to take care of them. And how does that change the dynamic, within their romantic relationship? If now, they're being taken care of, can the caretaker still see you sexually? It brings up a lot, as well as feeling alone. And that's why I do a lot of work with groups. I say, your best resource, are other women, other people going through this, so that you're not alone. And those feelings of being betrayed by your body, that can be really tough, especially when you're wanting to be intimate and having that betrayal. How do you trust your own body? How do you trust yourself? But there's a lot of work, that can be done around that. But those are just some, physical and the psychological. I feel like they cross a lot.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot. And I know you mentioned some strategies, but what are some ways or some things that can help in mitigating some of those physical and psychological impacts?
Therapy for sure. I say get yourself an individual therapist, and there are quite a few who have gone through similar ordeals, and I think they can be an amazing resource. But maybe a therapist who's trained in grief or medical trauma would probably be a good selection. I know EMDR is specifically recommended if there was I know that there could be trauma around hearing you have breast cancer. So that moment when you're told, sometimes there can need to be some EMDR work around that. Or after the biopsy, hearing maybe that it's worse, any of that, can all kind of feed into it. So I think individual work, and then I would say that there are a lot of really good nonprofit organizations. One that I've worked with for the girls, it's based out of Williamsburg. They cater to women all over the country. They are a great resource. I know there's also one in Austin. I'm gonna blank on the name right this second, so I feel bad about that. But there are quite a few out there, and I would say reach out to them because they're an amazing resource. And then a lot of times through there you can connect with other women going through the same stages you are, depending where you are in the process. And so I think really you heal a lot through connection. Not keeping it in. And then, of course, finding somebody who is familiar with breast cancer, who can maybe help you with a low level exercise regime. I think that can really help kind of get you back on track, trusting your body, a nutritionist, depending on what kind of, cancer, what it's showing. All of those people I think can be really helpful. And then adding in self-care, if a massage would feel good. I always, tell my clients going through that, ask themselves each day, what would feel good to you right now? And it might change, maybe it would be, gosh, I would love a smoothie. Okay, give that to yourself. Another day it might be, I need to stay in bed. I just need to stay in bed today. I know radiation can cause fatigue up to a year. And if you're experiencing that fatigue, let yourself rest. Give that to yourself, just like you would give it to a daughter or a mother or a girlfriend, And so I think all of those things can sort of help in healing through that process.
Okay. Now, I know we barely scratched the surface of the work that you do, because there's a lot to the type of work that you do. But is there anything else that you would like to say about sex therapy that we haven't talked about or that I didn't ask?
Gosh, I didn't talk a lot about my kink clients. I definitely enjoy them as well. And I feel like they're a big part of the community. So I just, I want to mention them as well. And,
that's the question that I forgot to include. I had written one down for myself to include in this, and I forgot the question about kink.
Oh, sure. No, that's okay. Yeah.
So one thing I know that a lot of people have trouble with regularly is, what is the difference between a kink and a fetish?
Sure.
I see so many people getting the two confused constantly. So if you could give us some differences and similarities, that'd be helpful.
So the way I conceptualize it is a kink is more of a nice to have. It can kind of fluctuate. So maybe one day, we do a little bondage. The next day, maybe some spanking. It's more fluid. It's more flexible. Whereas a fetish is something that's really needed, for that person to have the sexual experience. And what that might look like, is just an easy one, foot fetish. Right.
Yeah.
That for that person to enjoy their sexual experience, there needs to be a foot component to it. And so basically a fetish is really inflexible. It's something that's almost required. Whereas a kink, like I said, is more nice to have, and it can kind of move in its nature of how it shows up.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good explanation. That makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned like a foot fetish, for example.
Yeah.
What are some of the most common fetishes that you see out of curiosity?
One I've been seeing a lot of, even in couples that you would never expect it, is actually choking, which can be.
That's very big right now.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say, and I'm not sure maybe where it stems from. Maybe porn is one theory I've heard, kind of floated around, but I always when I hear that, I go, oh my gosh, okay, we really need to talk because it it can be potentially dangerous.
Right.
So what I want to make sure is like, okay, well, if you're choking, do you have something other than a safe word? So
Right.
what I might say is like, okay, can we cough 3 times? If this is becoming problematic, or is there another way that we can communicate just to make sure that if there is an issue, or maybe it's no longer feeling good, right? If it starts to feel scary, that you have a way to alert your partner, okay, let's take a pause, and so that's one. I think bondage I'm seeing a lot more of too. And so again, I just say, well, if there's anything going on with the mouth, I want to make sure that you have another way to kind of tap out or alert your partner. And anything more extreme, I say, well, beginning, middle, and end. Let's just kind of make sure we script it almost like in D&D. You kind of
Right.
know where it's going.
So you plan the scene.
That's exactly right. And so I think those are probably the two big ones I see pretty regularly is the choking and the bondage.
Okay. How about like there are so many kinks in the world. Millions really, if you really want to get down to it. But like what do you see common these days? Do you notice that these things come in like fads, or like is it influenced by media, and like just what are your thoughts overall around it?
Yeah, I think especially for couples that aren't already in the kink community, it's for sure coming through media. And I think some of the TV shows you see, or for sure, 50 Shades of Grey back then when that came out. Now I think, yeah, media, trends, and porn, any of that, I think at least creates that curiosity that allows people to want to experiment.
Right.
So yeah, I would say for sure.
Now there are all sorts of communities in Austin. I know there's a rope community. I know there's a BDSM community. What other communities are out there, just so people know that they exist?
Oh gosh, there are so many. Well, like there's bigs and littles, those that like to kind of role play.
Age play.
Age play, exactly. Another one I've been hearing more about is, and I'm blanking on the fetish now, but the smothering, feeling like you're being smothered by a giant.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I guess kind of giant play. And really just you've got your kind of run-of-the-mill dungeons too for those that are wanting to really get into more fetish and interest play, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And there's so many, there's furries, there's so many different things out there. I just wanted to mention some of those things on the show today because people hear kink and fetish but don't always know what to put with what. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and hot wifing is one I've been seeing a lot more in Texas. So there's definitely a very big hot wifing community kind of beneath the surface. I don't think it's too hard to find, but I know there are even some parties where that is kind of a primary focus.
Okay, cool. Okay, so thank you for reminding me about that. Sure. So switching gears a little bit to you as a therapist.
Sure.
What kind of experience do you have working with particularly vulnerable clients, such as those who are transgender, undocumented, or BIPOC, to name a few examples?
I've always had a pretty diverse clientele. I do a lot of work around identity. So that naturally tends to lend itself towards those, who are questioning their sexuality or gender. So, transgender, those that may be fluid, maybe those that are on the asexual spectrum. Also, my BIPOC clients, I think because honestly, I'm not even sure why, but maybe because I spent a lot of time in New York City, I seem to get a lot of, BIPOC clients that feel comfortable with me, as well as I would say poly clients. I work with a lot of poly clients that maybe have had a therapist before finding me, and I'm always kind of shocked at the judgment and
Totally.
pathologizing. I mean, really, the pathologizing that goes on, it actually really upsets me when that comes in. Same thing around any sort of kink or fetish. I think there's a lot of misinformation. I also think that I hate to even say this, but sometimes those that maybe work from a religious background, it doesn't allow for a lot of openness in some of these areas. And so
Yes.
they can have experienced a lot of judgment when they've been most vulnerable. And so I'm always happy to work with anyone that's experienced that and hopefully give them a new experience, something that, allows them to really be who they are.
Okay, cool. So, a lot of times before somebody makes an appointment or after they make an appointment, then people get nervous about a first session with a new therapist. So, what could a new client expect from an initial session with you? And what about on an ongoing basis?
So usually in my initial sessions, I really just want to get to know you and get to know what you're looking for, what you're wanting to work through, kind of what your goals are. And so, the first session, I really will let them do a lot of talking, just so I can get a feel for them. And, then I'll save maybe 10-15 minutes at the end if they have any questions for me or if they want, some information about maybe how I might conceptualize or work with their case.
Got it.
Yeah.
And on an ongoing basis, like do you generally structure your sessions, or is it, or just tell me more about your style and approach there?
Yeah, so it usually, whether it's individual, couple, throuple, polycule, I when they first come in, once we get going, unless we've talked ahead of time about something specific we're going to be dialoguing about or working on, I want to meet them where they are that day and just say, hey, how was your last week? What's been going on? Is there anything immediate that we need to address? So what that might look like with a couple, say that they've had a big blowout, maybe even right before coming in, we might jump into a frustration dialogue before it starts to devolve. Or, if it's an individual, like I've had a couple pets pass away this last week. And so, it's turned into more of a, yeah, I know. I was like, gosh, what is going on? But we'll do a grief session. We'll put everything else on hold and address what's immediately in the room. Barring that, say everything's been good, we've had a pretty good week, or there's nothing really big that's come up, then we'll start to do some bigger work, right? Maybe addressing some of the bigger issues they came in for. So if it's someone who's been questioning their gender identity, we might jump in. Okay, well, how has this developed? How were you seeing when you were younger? Is that, oh, that didn't feel good. Okay, well, what would feel good now? And so we start to kind of do a little bit more analysis, I guess, if that makes sense. And then we might work up. I do get homework, not always, but sometimes, say, for that client that is wanting to, experiment with gender, I'll say, well, let's find some people you admire, maybe on Instagram or in the media, and let's, see what look, what you like, and let's try it on. and see how you feel in that. And, maybe start at home, playing with makeup or, whatever it is. And go from there. So we'll do some analysis and then, okay, how do we thread that into the next week?
Got it. Got it. Okay, very cool. I'm a big fan of homework too.
Very good.
So I really like this next question, and it's so hard, but how would you say your clients would describe or experience you?
Oh gosh, I think it probably depends on the client. It's interesting. I was talking about this with a client. She was really wanting to work on relationships, and so maybe this is a little Freudian, but I say, in a way, your therapist becomes who you need them to be for whatever it is you're working on. So I think, for some clients, maybe I show up as a mom, other clients, a big sister, or maybe a best friend. It really depends. And if I can kind of get a sense, I'm happy to kind of facilitate some of that because my hope is that it helps them heal so they can take that relationship and apply it in the real world.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Now, are you a therapist who will laugh or cry with your clients?
Yes, I definitely will laugh. I try to hold space. It's funny, I will definitely cry after session, but I might tear up, but I usually won't actively cry because I want to give that to them. I don't really know what the right answer is there, but I don't know that there is one.
There isn't one, and this question has garnished all sorts of responses. So there is no right answer. That's the gray that we work in, right?
Yeah, and I think it also depends really on what they're needing. If it feels like it's okay and that would be helpful, I might allow myself to go there. But I think usually I just want to hold the space in case, they're needing more stability. But again, it really is a case by case basis on that. But laughing, yeah, I think I have a pretty dark sense of humor. So I'm happy to follow you wherever that goes.
Okay. Now, one of my favorite questions is, how do you define holding space for someone?
I would define that as meeting them where they're at, and allowing them to just be in whatever state they need at that moment. That could be crying, that could be, laughing about something, that could be, letting them get really angry. And I feel like especially with couples, I always joke sometimes I keep an extra sweater around, yeah, if they need to yell, I might get, nervous myself and I'll swap out the sweater later. But, I just want to let them express what they need to express because I think most of the day we don't have that freedom, especially in kind of the society we live in. It's not really okay to express the emotion that often really needs to come out, especially right now with COVID,
Totally agree.
Anger, sadness, fear, whatever it is. And so I just want to let them have that in session.
Cool. Yeah, everybody says something different about that question, but we all mean the same thing. And I think it's so cool to see everybody's different answers.
Yeah.
So the next question is, what is the best advice you've ever received from a supervisor? Could be any supervisor of any type.
I think it was probably Claudia. She recommended with couples doing breakout sessions early. So like with my couples now, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do the individual session, get to know you, understand kind of where you're at. And then I'll do those breakout sessions. And what I do there is I'll take a family history as well as a relationship and sexual history. And I feel like that really gives me kind of a roadmap to understand each individual and to kind of look ahead, especially in couples work, and see, ooh, okay, what might we bump into here? And
Right.
so that I can kind of have that in mind as we move forward. And I think, also it gives the client an opportunity really early on, if there is something going on beneath the surface, Like I've had one revelation, a lot of affairs, right? That may come out right then. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Now I know this is going to come up right away. It kind of pushes it forward. Another one, I've had some pretty crazy confessionals. One woman confessed, that she really thinks she's gay, and that's why she doesn't get aroused, and yet she's been married for quite a while, right? And so things like that, like, oh, okay, and is there a way for us to bring that out in session? But I think that's the best piece of advice, is doing those breakout sessions early. And then again, if you get stuck, if you're just not getting any movement in a couple and you can't really figure out why, great, that's another time to do those. And I think that's the best piece of advice I've gotten, kind of, especially in couples work.
Yeah, I definitely see the value in that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
What have you personally learned about yourself and or the world through your practice?
Gosh, I think, what have I learned about myself? It's interesting. I lived in New York City for a long time, and there everyone always said, "Oh, you're from Texas. You're conservative." And then I moved back to Texas, and everyone says, "Oh my gosh, you're way out there. You're incredibly liberal." And I just think, well, it really depends on where you're at. How you get characterized. But I do think I'm probably a lot more open than most people. I guess I have learned that. And I think that's only increased with my work. It's made me even more open. And I guess I really love good people. I guess that's another thing. I really love people. Maybe those that are cruel, I don't know that I love them quite as much, but
Fair.
and yeah, now I feel like I undo a lot of their harm. And what have I learned about the world in my work? Gosh, everyone has a whole lot of shame, and they're walking around
so much.
and I just want to tell them, man, whatever it is, it's normal. I promise. You think it's strange, but it's really not. It may feel strange to you, but it's really not. It's, especially in the sexual arena, I feel like, there is no normal. There really isn't. And, what people show on the surface, they're just not telling you what goes on behind closed doors or, in their own mind. So that's probably what I've learned about the world is.
I agree with that totally. So much shame.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Yeah.
So say you've had a long day of seeing clients. What is the one thing you absolutely have to do every day to take care of yourself?
Gosh, I build in a lot of mindlessness at the end of the day. Lately, I don't know if it's just because of COVID, so I'm going to admit my guilty pleasure. Occasionally, we will watch something like Bachelor in Paradise and analyze the relationship dynamics. My partner is also in the therapy world, so we kind of nerd out, and then we order a whole bunch of DoorDash. Sometimes we'll order from 2 or 3 places and just eat the worst things in the world just because it's been a tough day. Otherwise maybe I'll do a salt bath sometimes. But yeah, trying to make it light and fun, maybe playing Clue with the kiddos. Yeah, just keeping it light.
And easy, it sounds like. Not complicated.
Exactly. Light and easy. Exactly. Ordering DoorDash, not, so I can just go sit in my chair and hang out with family or friends. A lot of times we'll have some friends over and, maybe not so much right now, but, split maybe a bottle of wine and again, order the food and just decompress.
Okay. Very cool. How would you define happiness?
Oh gosh, that is a tricky one. I think it's really living in the present moment experiencing those and the world around you and letting it be. And I think, happiness can kind of look and feel across a broad spectrum, because I think you can be, say happy sad, or, maybe even happy mad. And so it's really the only thing I would say across the board is being in that present moment and just allowing yourself to experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing that I think we all struggle with, is being present, staying in the present moment. I mean, because that's where the good stuff is really at,
No, I agree. Because if your mind is elsewhere, worrying about the past or worrying about what's going to happen in the future, you're missing out. You're missing out on what's in front of you. And everything else is either has already happened or hasn't happened yet. So, the way you can kind of work through both of those is again, just by being present, by allowing yourself to just sit in wherever the experience is, whether it's good or bad, really,
Right.
or however you define that,
Right. Yeah. 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 And even though something may be like subjectively bad feeling in the like overarching theme of our life, it may be a good thing. You know what I mean? So I don't know. The present moment is something I'm always trying to adjust to and stay in, because like, I think if we can't stay in the present moment, then we're going to miss all the good things that do come our way,
Yeah. Now, and I think it's also gratitude, right? Being able to have gratitude for the people around you and the experiences you're having, even if it's something as simple as, yay, I got to order Chili's on DoorDash. It's just gratitude that I get to have that in the moment. And I know that's very simple and, just a silly.
And so like pop psychology, but there is a lot of truth to it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so we're down to 2 more questions. Both are a little vulnerable.
Okay.
The first one is, what is the most embarrassing moment you have had as a clinician to date?
Oh my gosh. So I've had a few, but I think the one I run into probably more than I would like to. I have a kind of like dyslexia, but it's called dyscalculia for numbers and scheduling. And oh my gosh, the worst. I remember I was working at CAC, and oh my gosh, the scheduling, it was so narrow. And every time I would try to put in an appointment, I would somehow mess it up, and I would have to go back to the very sweet secretary and say, I'm so sorry. I entered this wrong. Can you delete it for me so I can re-enter it? And this would happen probably at least 3 times a day when I was there. And, I always tell my clients, like, if anything ever looks off, oh my gosh, please check with me. I try to, and so what I try to do now, I just try to do it while I'm on the phone or on a session with them, and I'll say it out loud as I enter it. And that way they can correct me if I somehow do it incorrectly. But that I feel like, I always get embarrassed by that, because old academic wounding, perhaps.
Yeah, that's hard. That's really rough. But I do the same thing with my clients. I make them stay in session with me, even if we are over time. If we're setting another appointment, I need to get on my schedule, because I will forget, and it has happened.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Now, the next vulnerable question here is, are you in therapy, or have you ever been in therapy?
Oh, yes. I have been in therapy for many, many years. A funny story, actually. The first time I went to therapy was actually when I was at Columbia and, going teaching there. And they recommended it for everybody. I guess there had been a couple of suicides the year before I got there. And I didn't really know much about it, other than I'd always been kind of interested in it. And that's kind of what got my foot in the door. And, then I've tried to always keep a therapist pretty much since then. I may have gone maybe a year or two without, if I was between or moving or something like that. But I think, especially as a therapist, I think you should be in therapy. And I don't know, and now I'm shooting people, but I think, it's healthy. I think it keeps you clear. It holds you accountable. So I don't know, maybe I'll regret saying should later, but
no, I'm right there with you. I could never trust a therapist that has not done therapy themselves, because how are you to understand what it is your client's experiencing? You know what I mean?
Exactly, the whole process. I agree completely with you. Yes. Yeah.
Well, Sarah, is there anything else you think would be good for potential clients or other therapists to know about you?
Gosh, I think as far as clients, I am more than happy to work with whomever comes in my door in whatever form and whatever shape, whatever relationship or no relationship. I'm happy to meet you where you are. As far as therapists and other clinicians, doctors, I really do enjoy collaborating. That's actually why I went the MFT route. And I haven't been doing it that long, and I really look forward to meeting more of you. I really love the field, and I think there's just so much to learn.
Always.
So, yeah, in other words, I have an open door for clients and clinicians.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Sarah.
Well, thank you. It was fun.
The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
Thank you for listening to NextQuest podcast. I learned something new today, and I hope you did too. Stay tuned for our episode next week featuring Katie Bruce, licensed clinical social worker supervisor, who will be talking about her work in practice with an episode titled The Melted Ice Cream of Being a Person. NextQuest podcast is sponsored by Jan Dimmitt Resources. Save yourself the time and stress of credentialing and let the experts at Jan Dimmitt Resources do what they do best. For over 20 years, Jan Dimmitt Resources has provided administrative support and credentialing services to mental health professionals in Texas and beyond. Visit their website at jandimmitt.com. That is JANDIMMITT.com, or call 512-731-5725 for more information on all the ways they can make running your practice easier for you. NextQuest podcasts rely solely on donations to keep this project going. Please consider becoming a patron on my Patreon page at www.patreon, that's patreon.com/NextQuestPodcast, or you can make a one-time donation on my website at www.nextquestcounseling.com/aboutnextquestpodcast. You can also support the podcast by liking our Facebook page. Until next question, this is Noah Garcia signing off.